Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance.
Look, Margaret, we have to re-elect Donald Trump as president. The contrast is so extraordinary between higher inflation at home and war overseas. That's the Biden record, and the Trump record of peace at home and prosperity. That is an incredible thing to run on. And importantly, it's an incredible thing to deliver for our country. So I think we need to help Donald Trump get across the finish line. That's why I've spent a fair amount of time with him the past couple of weeks, helping him raise some resources, showing up in support in New York. But it's all about getting him elected president. I actually don't care that much who the vice president is, because Trump's ultimately going to govern. First of all, many of the tariffs that Joe Biden has endorsed in the last couple of weeks are tariffs that he ran against in 2020. But now that he sees that Donald Trump is leading him in the polls, he's adopting the Donald Trump agenda. That's not actually being a good policy president. That's shifting on politics because you know you're about to lose. Biden's entire agenda, such that it exists, has been about protecting green energy jobs at the expense of the industrial heartland. If you are in Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania, you are not being empowered or enriched by Joe Biden's green energy agenda. So him applying tariffs on the green agenda stuff, does it help steelmakers? Does it help natural gas workers? Does it help the heart of the American economy? The answer is no, which is another reason why Donald Trump would make a much better president. I don't necessarily buy the premise there, Margaret. If you apply tariffs, really what it is you're saying that we're going to penalize you for using slave labor in China and importing that stuff in the United States. What you end up doing is you end up making more stuff in America, in Pennsylvania, in Ohio. Significant increases in people investing in factory construction, but it takes time, Margaret. And that's one of the reasons why I think that we need a second term of President Trump is this stuff is not going to happen overnight. The American heartland wasn't destroyed in 4 years. It's not going to be rebuilt in 4 years, but you really need to double down on this policy of bringing good jobs back to the heartland and, more importantly, making stuff in America. We have to be self-reliant as a country. We need to apply some broad-based tariffs, especially on goods coming in from China, and not just solar panels and EV stuff. We need to protect American industries from all of the competition. Because here's the thing, Margaret, the reason China beats us, it's not because they have better workers. It's because they're willing to use slaves to make things there. We want American workers to make this stuff at good wages. Universities are controlled by left-wing foundations. They're not controlled by the American taxpayer, and yet the American taxpayer is sending hundreds of billions of dollars to these universities every single year. Universities are part of a social contract in this country. They educate our children. They produce important intellectual property. They get a lot of money because of it. But if they're not educating our children well and they're layering the next generation down in mountains of student debt, then they're not meeting their end of the bargain. I think it's totally reasonable to say there needs to be a political solution to that problem. American leadership is not making smart decisions. We are pushing other nations into the arms of the Chinese because we don't make enough stuff, because we pursue a ridiculous foreign policy very often. We have to be more self-reliant. I don't like China. I don't like that China has stolen a lot of American jobs. The reason they've done it is because American leadership has made bad decisions. That's our fault, and that's something we can fix as Americans. I think the reason that we have to be smart in Ukraine is we don't have a strategy. What is Joe Biden trying to do? What is another $60 billion accomplishing that $120 billion hasn't? We have to have a smart strategy to spend American taxpayer dollars. The reason Europe has become weaker is because they've deindustrialized. And why have they deindustrialized? Because they pursued a green energy agenda following the lead of the Biden administration, and that necessarily empowers China and Russia. We need to acknowledge that it's our decisions that are making these countries stronger. We need to fix that, not whine at countries that have 10 million people. What Donald Trump has said, which is very consistent with what I said during my own campaign, is that the gross majority of abortion policy is going to be made at the state level. And I actually think if you compare his view of saying, look, this is a tough issue, we need to let people debate and decide this very tough issue in this new environment where it's been kicked back to Democratic
you want
legislators.
A minimum federal standard.
But Margaret, compare this to the Biden administration approach is we want Christians to perform abortions and we want American taxpayers to fund late-term abortions. Gross majority of policy here is going to be set by the states. I am pro-life. I want to save as many babies as possible. And sure, I think it's totally reasonable to say that late-term abortions should not happen with reasonable exceptions. But I think Trump's approach here is trying to settle a very tough issue and actually empower the American people to decide it for themselves. I don't necessarily buy the premise there, Margaret.